Hello everyone. I hope that we're all beaming to all 450 odd people across Victoria. Welcome to the webinar. We want to fill you in and catch you up on all things COVID-19 that's going on in sport. Firstly, I'd like to thank the sports community, whichever part you're coming from, whether it be council or SSAs or RSAs or other recreational organisations. I'd like to thank you for your response, your patience, your work and your attitude in this really tricky time. It's been very difficult for everyone. It's probably the first time in the 30 years I've worked in sport where sport's been hit so hard, and we are managing really well, and we're going to fill you in on a few items today. If some of the information will be completely relevant to you depending on your organisation and circumstance, and some will probably be not so relevant, so you can take things on board as you see fit. We'll have a chance to ask questions afterwards, like when we send you an evaluation and a chance to fill out a survey, and we can follow up those. I have some questions with me already. Thank you to those people that have submitted the questions. And I would first like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, so various lands across Victoria, and pay my respects to elders past and present. For those of you that haven't met me, my name's Lisa Hasker, and I am obviously from the branding from Vicsport. We have been working very closely with All Sport and SRV, and also with VicHealth. So it's been fantastic to be in partnership with those groups and all of you to make sure that we're on top of what's happening in the COVID-19 space. Just to give you a bit of a background of what we've been through in the last month and a half. Obviously the first bit of information, or when we first got announced that we were going into lockdown type situations, the first thing was closing sport and notifying all our stakeholders of that, which was obviously a big shock for everyone, but everyone handled that extremely well. The second thing was to look at our businesses and see what we needed to do with staffing and expenses and forecasting to make sure that we survive as sports organisations. And I'm sure there's other organisations like councils and other rec organisations that are doing exactly the same thing. So difficult pieces of work, not easy for staff put in different situations, but everyone has handled that extremely well. The next kind of bit of work was looking at how we can connect with our members. And there's been a lot of work done on making sure that people connect with their members. There's been some great ideas around participation and connecting with members, which Tom will talk to in a minute. But that's really important that we still provide our members with value, even though it's not business as usual. So really important that we do that, and there'll be lots of ideas that come from different sports that people can share and use, and we're loading all that information onto the Vicsport website if you want some ideas. The next piece of work that we're now moving into is looking to the future and returning to play. Obviously that will be a different environment than what we're used to with the medical restrictions that we will have in place, and we're working closely with government around some return to play protocols in terms of the health and what that will look like and what you'd have to put into place COVID-19 health-wise in terms of distancing and other protocols, but also some return to play, a framework that you can use to check off that you as a sport or a club or a league or an association or a council have got everything in place to start up again, because there'll be some obviously different things we need to tackle in that space. I'll do some questions at the end, as I said, so I'll endeavour to cover as many of the questions as we have that have been put forward. Some you'll find will be covered in the presentations from each of our speakers. Others I might pick up at the end separately. I want to thank Tom Dixon from the Vicsport team, who will present next. Also to Ben Hartung from Sport and Rec Victoria, who stepped in at the last second for Tim Burke. Tim's been brought into some budget meetings, so we want him to be there, making sure he can help get as much money for sport and to support us as possible. So go Tim. Thank you to Chris Lacey from VicHealth, who will speak after Ben, and then to Steve Gatt from Sports Accounting Australia. Steve worked with Anthony on the Vicsport team to produce a document about sports finances, and thank you to all those sports who put forward all the information. And that document, Ben will probably talk to the information that's been used to help fashion up some information from government to support sport. And then we'll finish before the Q&A session with Amelia Lynch from Lander and Rogers, who will be able to give us a legal perspective. And then we'll finish off with the Q&A. So now I'd like to introduce Tom Dixon. Tom will have a bit of a chat about updates on participation and some ideas that he's seen that have been working for sports. And we'll then go to Tom for some questions at the very end as well. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Tom here from the Vicsport Northern Metropolitan Participation Office. I'm just going to give a quick update on what's been happening with all things participation since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had a lot of conversations with people at state sport associations and local governments and clubs as well. So first point I want to make is that even though we know there is a lot of impact on jobs at the moment, there's still a lot of people working away and a lot of great work taking place. So I think it's important that we do keep working together, and I think we are, and in some ways we're even more united on some of the key goals that we're all focusing on, including obviously supporting clubs is a really big one during this time, looking at how we can keep club members and participants engaged, promoting physical activity and making sure people keep up activity in the home or outside if they're going out for a walk by themselves or with people they live with. And also, of course, looking at innovation opportunities and what we can seek to address during this current downtime. In terms of engaging members, we've seen some great examples. The hashtag stay-at-home challenges that various sports like lacrosse, badminton, bowls, I'm sure many others have put together. We've got some of these on our website, so it's definitely worth taking a look if you're looking for some inspiration for your sport or club. In terms of social media, we've seen the rise of TikTok as a new social media platform that's gained a lot of traction. And I think what that really all about is just fun and just promoting people having fun at home and keeping people engaged that way. Another thing we've seen is in terms of general physical activity, a lot of councils and leisure centres putting together new resource hubs, virtual Get Active classes, live streaming different types of classes like yoga or whatever it is. My local council, Darabin, have been very good at doing that. And I'm sure many other councils as well have been adapting and putting together content to try and inspire and motivate people to stay active. So plenty of good innovative work, and I think people have responded pretty quickly and learned a lot about what innovation terms like agile really mean, because I think that type of quick thinking has been thrust upon us during this crisis and hasn't always been something that sport has thrived at. But I think it's important not to lie to ourselves and acknowledge that we have real concerns about loss of members who may not come back, and I guess the impacts on physical activity for people who are less active or struggling due to the economic circumstances of this pandemic. So I do think we face an uphill battle to retain, let alone to grow participation in sport. But I think we just need to keep working together to do what we can. One thing I've been thinking on is we're talking a lot about things that have changed, but we should also acknowledge the things that haven't changed. People are still people, and when we return to sport, a lot of the motivations that we often talk about for people to get into sport, I think, will be fairly similar. There might be some different concerns about not wanting to get too far from home or wanting to feel safe and make sure that there's no sort of ongoing threats about the virus spreading. But I think people will still be motivated by socialisation and making friends, by the health benefits of physical activity, and by wanting to feel good. I think that's a key word, thinking about how people feel. What we will need to do is come back as customer-centric as ever, if not even more. I think that's simply the key to this. It's it's having clubs and leisure centres just being the best they can, offering the right products to the right people, the right place and time. This might just simply mean stuff like more inclusive cultures, more flexible social activities, low cost and flexible payment programs, as the capacity to pay for a lot of people might be reduced. But just bringing it back to sport, just being something that's fun and inspiring. And maybe that will be looking at the types of fun elements we've been getting people to do at home, being creative, just setting up games and just doing whatever it is to be active. Bringing that kind of mindset across to sport could be a good way to do it. So the Doing Sport Differently framework that VicHealth and La Trobe University released last year is a very useful framework to think about this. In terms of just understanding barriers, thinking about customer experience, having the right deliverer, and having pathways for people to progress through different activities. So we're talking to VicHealth and La Trobe about doing some webinars and resources for clubs, and that's something that we'll hope to have over the coming months. But most of all, just I think keep up the great work and keep working together. With that, I'll hand back to you, Lisa.
See when I click back in again. There we go. Thank you, Tom. That's great. And there's a million ideas, and obviously we're in a state of flux in terms of what we're going to be allowed to do. But I think, as Tom said, the mindset of getting people to have fun, presenting our sport differently, obviously the start of all our sport and recreation activities, whatever the context is, will be different in the beginning. And I think we'll keep sharing ideas on that and working through and making sure that you're up to date with that. Now I'd like to throw to Ben Hartung. Ben is the Senior Advisor, Participation and Sector Development in Sport and Recreation Victoria. So he's been part of a special group and that's been connecting with us and VicHealth and working hour on hour, day on day since day one on COVID-19 and supporting sport and particularly the survival and thriving of sport. So I'd like to throw to Ben and thank you, Ben, in advance. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thank you to everyone who's made the effort to join the webinar today, and hopefully these will be useful insights for you. And as Lisa said, obviously any follow-ups that you may have relating to the government update that I'll provide to you or any of the other panel members today, please make sure you do direct those back through to Lisa and the team at Vicsport, and that way we can respond accordingly to them. I did want to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also any Aboriginal elders from other communities that might be joining us on the webinar here today. My first point is to say a massive thank you to the team at Vicsport, and great also to have Stephen Gatt from Sports Accounting Australia on the webinar today, because the amount of work that was done back out to peak bodies to help inform us around the financial impact of COVID was significant. And I know that the time that you received, many of your organisations received a survey or you linked in with Vicsport to let them know around your particular financial situation. All of that data was used to aggregate up into a broader piece that we commissioned Ernst & Young to do, which is the basis now of what is going to the Crisis Council of Cabinet this week. So I wanted to say thank you again for at that particular time when everything was swirling. It's probably still swirling for you in your environments, but to take stock of the current situation that you were in, particularly when you were looking at downplaying staff, the impact on your fixed costs, etc. That's something that was significant. And as I said, we used all of that data to inform the EY submission. There's been lots of work done in trying to formulate what the best response would be for government, and appreciating that in the portfolio that sport and rec and racing are in, there's the three components. So we've updated many people on teleconference over the last couple of weeks around those three components of what will be included in the cabinet submission, and that is to try to ensure that we can find some support funding support and in a survival package that is going to go to the Cabinet for the three elements, and that is professional sport, and certainly we've got a large number of 36 professional teams that are located and play in the national competitions but are based here in Victoria, and obviously some NSOs as well, which are very important to us in that sports ecosystem. We've clearly got the massive sport and community recreation, active recreation sector, so that's the second component, and then racing was included as well. So those three elements are put up into essentially a budget bid for Cabinet to consider, and they'll be going through that this week. I know that Peter Betson had previously updated people that we're likely to hear back from that in the next couple of weeks, but we are pedaling as fast as we can to develop appropriate guidelines that will give people direction about eligibility and the different levels of funding in this package. It will come in a couple of streams, so or tranches. There'll be the survival package, which is focused on from of COVID through to the 6-month sort of period, and that's a time frame that a lot of government agencies have been working on. That's sort of stage one or phase one of what the funding support would be. And then obviously if the situation continues and restrictions stay in place or aren't relaxed, and there's still obviously recognition that the burden that you have had put upon you is not going to disappear after 6 months. It won't disappear after even receiving hopefully some support under that first tranche of the package. We acknowledge that this is going to take an extended period of time, and in some cases, particularly with your membership, it might take a year or two to get back to where you had previously been operating. So with that acknowledgement, there'll certainly be a tranche 2, which is a sport rebound component, and that would be dealing with support over the medium to long term. And as I said, long term could be 2 to 3 year period. So today, I'm not at liberty to go through and open up exactly that whole package. Please appreciate that that's cabinet in confidence this week while they discuss that. But as Lisa said, Tim is in there, Peter Betson and other government staff are in there fighting to try to receive as much support as we can in there. And as soon as those guidelines are developed, we'll get those out to you. There's also an LGA reference group that Sport and Recreation Victoria are part of. Phil Sakeley, the Director of Community Infrastructure and Place, is part of that. So I know that there's a whole lot of LGAs that are informing information into there as well around the effects of COVID for their environments, and certainly that links into the return to play piece that Lisa also mentioned, and the importance of how we can try to establish a framework using the advice from the Department of Health at a federal level down to a state medical level with our Chief Medical Officer, etc., but to try to create a framework for you that guides you and as much as possible provides consistency around staggered return to play. We know that it is going to be in phases, so we've been looking at low risk, medium risk and high risk sports and activities, and trying to put a bit of a framework around for those activities to return, what principles would need to be put in place. I know there's a whole lot of frustration that you've gone through, and certainly we've felt it as well from government side around potential lack of consistency or diverse messages, particularly across jurisdictions around different activities. And please understand that's caused us some significant grief as well, trying to deal with messages that might have come out from an sport level at a federal level, but then obviously with the different jurisdictional restrictions, trying to balance that for what's appropriate in the Victorian context. So my empathy is there for those that have struggled to understand, in some cases, the consistency of those restrictions. At a federal level as well, I just wanted to mention that there's 2 groups. There's CASRO, which is the Committee of Sport and Recreation Officials, so the equivalent of Peter Betson at a national level, have been meeting every 2 weeks in a teleconference to discuss and share what the different states and territories are doing. That's a little bit how EY became involved in our report, because they were also doing some work in New South Wales and Queensland. So we felt it was important to have some intelligence around what other packages and levers governments were using to support their sector. The second federal group is MISRM, which stands for the Meeting of Sport and Recreation Ministers. So we've had both Minister Pakula from that professional sports side, and also Minister Spence on the community sports side represented those MISRM meetings. And again, a great opportunity nationally to go around and understand the different issues in there, particularly in this return to play piece that is of national interest, membership, and how to re-engage or keep engaged your membership and re-engage. And particularly too, maybe trying to continue the drives and efforts that everyone has been doing around attracting new membership. We all know, and I know Tim's spoken about it several times, that unfortunately once we lose a member or participant in our sport or activity, it is considerably harder to get them back. So there's that continual engagement piece, but there's also that new membership opportunity that certainly we would like to find a support mechanism to encourage people to continue to think innovatively and find ways to engage people in the sports and activities that you love. Those return to play guidelines and risk framework are currently being worked on, and I just wanted to share that, as I said, we need to wait for advice coming through. I know Sport Australia are doing some work with the Federal Department of Health on that exact piece. Originally, it started as an elite sport piece, and we know that from the Prime Minister's announcement on Friday that there was the desire to include community sport and recreational activities in there, and we think that's some great additions, because it would be very restrictive if it was just at the elite level. Just probably a couple of other things. We know today as well, the ATO announced that the JobKeeper package, that they're going to extend the time for enrolment for that, which is good news. And I know that a lot of your organisations have tapped into those federal and state funding opportunities, and I'd really encourage you to continue to explore those and work with contacts in relation to trying to see if that applies to you. One of the issues that will come out of when we do release the survival package for the sector is that it needs to be reconciled off against other types of support that you have been able to get. So there is an expectation from government that to receive support under what will be this new package, hopefully if we can get it all ticked off and green-lighted by the Cabinet this week, will be the fact that you have explored and done your best due diligence to try to extract funding from those other sources. And I know that you're working very hard on that. I'll end there, Lisa, and everybody. I just wanted to say thank you again. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your resilience. And Tom mentioned the word agility. I know we've all been trying to work in that with an agile frame, and that's not easy. It's not easy for government as well, who we pride ourselves on being connected and being able to quickly pull levers to provide support. And this has become a very, very complex task of trying to ensure that no one slips through the gaps in our thinking around funding. Please understand the interface too, with the fact that there's the federal funding and state funding. We know in the sports ecosystem that there'll be funding and hopefully different mechanisms that will be available for elite sport that may not and most likely won't filter down to state level and grassroots level with clubs and associations. So our task is to look at all of the different levels. Our focus will be though on the state peak bodies and ensuring that your organisations and your members are considered and appropriately recognised in the impacts that you're experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That was a fantastic update, and I know that'll be new information to a lot of people. So we now need to collectively, the 450 odd people on the call, send all our powers and thoughts to the Treasury, and so that they can tick off all the work that Sport and Rec have done, and those packages and information can come out to you as soon as possible. The timelines, as Ben said, are not known. It depends on what else the Treasury have to have on their list and debate around that. So we're just hoping, there's been lots of support from both our ministers, Minister Spence and Minister Pakula, and also the Chief Health Officer at state and federal level, and the Prime Minister around the importance of community sport and getting back up and running in line with professional sport. So those that rhetoric is very encouraging, and we just need to support each other and support SRV to get that through as quickly as possible. I will now go to Chris Lacey from VicHealth. Chris will be able to give you a bit of an update on what VicHealth is doing and some of the work maybe that we're doing together. And we've been in constant contact with Chris and his team through this time, because obviously VicHealth support a lot of us in our day-to-day activities. So we've been making sure that we're all on the same page and not duplicating any work, and making sure we're working together. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you to you and the whole Vicsport team for pulling this together. This is fantastic to get this opportunity, and to the 336 people that are on the line, thank you for taking the time to join with us today. Obviously, it's been a really challenging time for a lot of people, a lot of sports and clubs, and that's been right across the board. But we're hopeful at VicHealth that it can be an opportunity for us also to be thinking about how in the spring back, in the comeback into sport and rec, how we can make the most of the opportunity and maybe think about doing things a little bit differently. To start with, I also want to acknowledge the fact that we're all gathering on the land of the people of the Kulin Nations from right across Victoria, and I want to pay my respects to all elders past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous people that are joining us here today. First of all, you may have seen Sandro, our CEO, in the media quite a bit. We've been doing a lot of work at VicHealth supporting the Department of Health and Human Services and in their messaging. And so Sandro's been getting out there and talking about all the different health-based messages that have been important to get out there, and a lot of our comms have been pivoting towards that as well. So you may have seen VicHealth doing quite a bit of work in that space. In the background, though, we've been working really hard to engage with all of our partners, and there's many of those right across a whole heap of different investments. Obviously, with this audience, our sport and recreation partners have been the ones that we've been engaging with closely, all those that are funded through our Growing Participation in Sport program, our Active Women and Girls program, our innovation program, and all the other investments that we make in physical activity and sport, and making sure that that you are all aware that you have VicHealth support. And quite early on in the piece, we got on to our partners and just let them know that we're quite happy to negotiate around our timeframes and different deliverables, and making sure that all our partnerships are sustainable going forward. So if you haven't already, you should well and truly have been connected with at this stage, but if you haven't already and you're in one of those partnership spaces, feel free to connect with someone from VicHealth and we can talk that through further. The This Girl Can program has obviously been affected as well, and that's a massive program that VicHealth invests a lot into each year, around messaging about women and girls being more active. And that's pivoted a few different times across the period. Obviously, the This Girl Can Week, which is obviously a huge part of the calendar, not just for us, but for lots of groups around Victoria, was affected. We have pivoted that towards a more of an online focus. And so, again, those partners in that space should have heard from the This Girl Can team. But there is a web portal that we're uploading a whole lot of opportunities for women and girls to be active at the moment. So just encourage you to make use of that. It's getting a lot of traffic, and yeah, we really want to make sure that we continue to make the most of that. So again, getting connected with the This Girl Can reps would be fantastic. The active club grants, which is obviously a big part of our investment, and a lot of you may well be representatives of clubs that have been recipients of the active club grants. Those who've received grants in the past should have heard from us already, just saying we're extending the timelines. And the current grant round, which has just recently closed, has gone through all of our processes, and we'll be getting in touch with clubs, letting them know about the status of that sometime in May. We've also been proactive in that space and extended the timelines for those grants and to the grants automatically out until the end of 2021. So anyone that's in that space, you do have extra time to deliver on those grant outcomes. And we are open also to re-looking at the deliverables from those grants too. But our preference is just to extend the timelines out and hopes that assists everyone in being able to deliver on those programs. The next round for our active club grants will be out in September, and we'll be listening to the sports community about the best way we can utilise those to support clubs through that period. We've been working really closely with both Vicsport and Sport and Rec Victoria, and as Lisa mentioned, making sure that we're all on the same page and that we're in alignment, and everything that we're communicating to the sport and active recreation sector is consistent. So thanks to everyone from both Vicsport and SRV for their work in that space. We'll continue to work closely together, and that's going to be really important. We've also been working closely with the regional sports assemblies, and a shout out to anyone from the RSAs and from regional Victoria that's on the call today. Obviously, each of the RSAs got their own, like all the SSAs have as well, and local clubs have got their own unique sets of challenges, and we've been working closely with both the 9 RSAs and also Regional Sport Victoria, the peak body, to make sure that we're doing whatever we can also to respond to the needs of regional Victorians through this time. And there's been some really creative work done through the RSAs and through RSV, and really looking forward to seeing that roll out over the coming weeks and months as well. We just had a grant round around our ideas grants as well, which many of you may have applied for. We're still going through the final stages of negotiating on those grants as we speak, and will be announcements coming out in due course. We're also looking at our future investments at the moment and planning for the future. And so do keep your eye open for those grant rounds opening up. There may be opportunities to, again, work with VicHealth to continue to deliver on these fantastic outcomes for Victorians. So please keep an eye open for that. A commitment to communities affected by the bushfires too remains, and we are continue to look at opportunities to invest in projects that specifically support those communities. Obviously, with coronavirus on top of bushfires, those communities have been really affected really badly by that, and so we want to make sure that we're providing whatever supports that we can within that as well. More broadly, VicHealth has developed a resource hub, online resource hub, which is vichealth.vic.gov.au/coronavirus. It has been set up specifically to provide support to those in the health promotion sector. But in my mind, that includes all of us as well, because sport and recreation is absolutely health focused. And so there's a whole lot of resources on there that are really useful. And as you're considering how to provide support to your members and to your clubs, and thinking about a restart, there's a whole lot in there that I think you'll find really useful. So really encourage everybody to go online and make the most of that. There is a specific physical activity and sport section there, but all of the resources I think are actually really useful. So please make most of that. One of the areas that we're really beginning to focus in on is around mental well-being of everyone, all Victorians, particularly from our team though, mental well-being through those in the sport and rec industry, those who are staff and working in that space, but also volunteers and members. And so we are beginning to roll out some projects that will specifically focus in on the mental well-being of the community, and you'll see some more about that coming up in the next little while. We're working with Love Me, Love You and Lance Machoni there around some webinars that are specifically focused in on providing some supports, whether it's people at a committee level, whether it's coaches and others as well. So keep your eye open for that. That'll come out shortly. And as Tom mentioned, we're also looking at doing a series around doing sport differently as well, in partnership with Vicsport. And that's really to try to invest and assist sports in their thinking about what can be done differently in order to engage more people, particularly those who are underrepresented, and what we can be doing in the restart and the reopening of sport to make sure that we include everybody in the restart and that no one gets left behind. We view obviously the shutdown has been a really challenging period, like I said at the start, but also, as I said, we're really hopeful that this time of reflection, this time of shutdown gives us an opportunity to think about what the restart might look like. And so we're really encouraging all of you to think strongly about that. What can we be doing right now that prepares us to be in the best place that we can be when we can open back up again? And VicHealth is here to support all of you within that as well. So if you have ideas, if you have queries, make use of the resources that are available, the webinars that are coming up. If there's specific things that you'd like to connect on, you can do that either directly to VicHealth or through Lisa and Tom and the team at Vicsport, and we'd be more than happy to discuss things further with you. That's probably enough from our end. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to any questions that pop up later on.
Thank you, Chris. That's fantastic and a really good overview, and it covers off on quite a few of the questions that that we've been asked by various people. And I can go to any that are left at the end, as I said. As Chris said, I think the doing sport differently is a given our current circumstance. We won't be going back to exactly what we know. We won't be going back to full-blown sports, potentially in terms of crowds, contact, and using club rooms potentially, given the restrictions. And as they are changed, as we go back to normal, there'll be various levels of doing sport differently as we go back to what we're used to. But it's a real opportunity for sport and recreation to think about and be innovative, and think about our customers and present things differently to keep people on board, and to present sport in a different way to people that haven't been with us in the past. So I think the work that is going to come out of this, to look at the Doing Sport Differently framework that La Trobe University and the Centre for Sport and Social Impact have put together, and addressing that and looking at that and modifying it for our current circumstances is going to be absolutely crucial. Now I want to go to Stephen Gatt from Sports Accounting Australia. And as some people have said on the line, Stephen was instrumental in helping us put together the financial survey to sport that has given some figures and some insights to government to help with the support packages that have been presented to Treasury. So thank you, Steve and his team in advance. But Steve will take us through some of the support packages that are available. Some of you will have seen them, some may not have. So thank you to Steve, and I'll throw to Steve now.
Okay, everyone, I am here, but I'm getting a message from Zoom saying that my camera is not being able to be detected. So maybe Bron can fix that in the background, because it was working earlier. So apologies for that. But good morning, everyone, and thank you, Vicsport, for the opportunity. Certainly in a period of uncertainty, there's one thing that I know for certain, is that accountants haven't been this popular since the GST was introduced. The phone has certainly been ringing hot, and a lot of information is being requested. So I'm not sure whether you can see the PowerPoint presentation that we prepared, but I think it's being put up now. Thanks, Bron. So basically, we wanted to take you through 4 opportunities that exist for organisations. All of these opportunities require that your organisation employs staff. So they've really been designed to protect jobs and to help organisations keep their staff engaged through this period. The first one listed here is the Cash Boost, which is a federal initiative which provides a payment between $20,000 and $100,000. The good news is that you don't need to do anything other than submit your BAS. So many organisations would have already received the first instalment, either as a credit against GST owing or as a cash payment. The second one is a Victorian Government Business Support Fund, which is a payment of $10,000. This is only available for organisations that have been impacted by the restrictions and that have an annual payroll of less than $650,000. And you must apply for this online through the Victorian Government website. The third is another state government package regarding payroll tax. So payroll tax only kicks in once you've got an annual payroll of over $650,000. And this subsidy only applies if your annual payroll is less than $3 million. So there's a range there which makes this applicable. You apply for this through SRO online, and you'll either be refunded if you pay monthly, or when you submit your annual return, you won't be required to make a payment. Now, the fourth one, I think both the words JobKeeper and unprecedented will probably be the most used words of 2020. I don't think anyone can seem to talk about COVID-19 without using those words at the moment. But with JobKeeper, there's a criteria that includes a 30% revenue decline. Now, I could probably spend 10 minutes just talking about that topic alone, so I'm not going to go into the detail on that. I just want you to be aware that the application process is more complex than the others are, and it's vitally important that your payroll manager and whoever lodges your BAS are involved and across the detail. To access JobKeeper payments from the 30th of March, up until the announcement Ben just made, you only had a couple of days to get this completed. By the sounds of it, there may be an extension, which you can also look into. But the advice here is seek expert advice if you're unsure, because it's not a simple process and you don't want to miss out just because you haven't followed the right steps. So if you move to the next slide, Bron. So the theme of this slide is really forecast, forecast, forecast. I'm sure everyone has got lots of scenarios in play, such as what if we start back in July? What if we don't get back in 2020? And where do those assumptions, where do they leave us financially? It's vital for boards, directors, finance committees and management to be across this information and understand the different scenarios that are in play. So I've listed here some of the questions that if you're presented with a forecast, you need to ask. So what risk is there? What's the dollar impact of that? What are the key assumptions behind the forecast? So you can challenge those assumptions. It's no point getting a forecast that has an assumption that you're going to be fully up and running in July if that's not necessarily likely, or you're going to be coming back in a gradual manner. And is there any upside in those numbers? Also, what's important, you will probably be doing several forecasts. So what has changed since the last forecast? Why has the number gone from that to that? And how does the forecast impact your cash position throughout the year? This is critical, and I'll touch on that briefly on the next slide. And also, you should be having discussions about what are the other opportunities to increase your revenue or reduce your costs, like contacting, your photocopier provider, talking to your landlords about rent reduction. What are the other opportunities of earning revenue through an online presence? So next slide, thanks, Bron. So slide 3, it's just an example of a cash flow graph that compares the different forecasts. So in this situation, you've got a budget cash forecast versus a new forecast, and it shows the difference that each of these scenarios have. The key message here is that your cash position is your number one priority. You've got to know your worst case, and you've got to put the plans in place to deal with that case. So just some closing recommendations. You should involve your entire exec team and staff, and you should communicate more with your board and finance committees than would be your normal practice during this time. And finally, to seek expert advice if you're unsure how to access the stimulus packages. So thanks for the opportunity, and sorry I couldn't get my camera to work. I'll hand back to Lisa.
Just waiting for the video to come up, everyone. not going to come up. Technology, don't you love it? Here we go. Thank you, Steve. Some good tips relevant for all of us. And if there's things in there that you think your business hasn't had the opportunity to look into, if you're not the finance person, then speak to that person. But there's some good packages available. And obviously that will be, as Ben said, supplemented by some funding from Sport and Recreation Victoria. I think the important thing there in a business finance context, but also in a return to play context, is that we all start thinking about scenarios. What if we can start in a month? How long is it going to take us to get up and running? What are the implications? And some of the work that we're doing around a return to play framework or checklist will help with that. With some sports, how long is it going to take to get the fields up and running, even if you're just training in the first instance? There's a lot of things to think about that a lot of you are already on top of, and who else do you need to think about to get that going? So there's a million things to think about, and depending on when restrictions are relaxed, it'll depend on how much time we have to get ready. So it'll be an interesting time, as it was with the shutdown. Now I would like to throw to Amelia Lynch, who's a partner at Lander & Rogers. Amelia's been helping us with advice along the way. The first bit of advice, which you may have seen on our website, was around running your AGM in this strange environment and electronically. And I know a lot of you have had great success in running your AGM, and some of you may need to tap into that digital environment as we go forward. So I'll throw to Amelia, and then we'll have a chance for Q&A with the whole panel after we've heard from Amelia. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa said, I'm Amelia Lynch, head of the Sport and Leisure team at Lander & Rogers. I've been talking, all my clients are in the sport and leisure sector, so I've been talking to sport quite a lot in the last few weeks, as I'm sure everyone has been, and just really talking to them about how they're dealing with the Australian government and state government's restrictions on how we live and play sport and operate business. I guess I started to sort of jot down, based out of those discussions, that some phases to the responses of sport to COVID-19. And obviously that has, as time passes, it's been shifting more and more towards a focus on return to play. But I think there's still clearly 4 distinct phases that are all taking place in an overlapping kind of way. It's obviously a quickly changing environment, so I expect that the phases will continue to evolve, but I think sometimes it can really help to give you some structure to focus on, to sort of segment down and chunk it down, to narrow your focus to try and work your way through it. So I think a lot of these issues are much broader than legal issues, but each of them has a legal element. So broadly speaking, the 4 phases, response phases for COVID-19 are that the first was urgent actions. So things that came about as a result of COVID-19, the things that you needed to deal with that you hadn't necessarily expected. And that had everyone really, rushing around trying to focus on some really significant changes in a very short period of time. The second phase was creating content. So figuring out new and digital ways of connecting with the industry audience during COVID-19. So engaging with fans, participants, stakeholders and staff, and really figuring out how you can be connected with the people within your sport broadly while this was going on and everyone was trying their best to stay at home. The third phase, which is one that probably surprised me a little, is really can boil down to business as usual or focusing on project work. While there's obviously a lot of brand new things going on that are very specifically responding to COVID-19, there's also some business as usual going on in the background, and it's been really important that's been looked after at the same time. And the final one is, as we've all talked about a lot, return to play, so planning for recovery and reactivation. I guess it's helpful to drill down on some of the legal issues that have come up across those 4 phases. There's certainly not an exhaustive list, but these are the really common areas that we've been talking to clients about and helping them work through. The first is staff, so the reduction in hours. Obviously, as Steve mentioned, JobKeeper payments, considerations about stand down or redundancy, but also looking at working from home, remote working, offering new training. I know that even at our firm, they had started down a pathway of Microsoft Teams. It wasn't really something we embedded into our day-to-day operations. There had been a planned date of doing that from 1 July, so everything was brought forward rather quickly, which I think everyone has had to do it to a different extent. But along with that comes some training for your staff about how to use those tools to their greatest extent. So all of that obviously is happening in an environment where you're operating remotely and doing it all online to have those conversations. I guess that the issue around staff and reduced hours, stand down, JobKeeper payments have really impacted each of the other 3 phases, because if you have less staff, then clearly you've got to try and do all the other things that you're doing with a reduced workforce. The second key issue probably falls into the business as usual and the urgent task sort of spans across 2 different phases. So one, that's around contracts. So in some ways it's about existing contracts and, for example, funding agreements or sponsorship agreements where you can't deliver on the benefits that you were intending to provide the government funder or the sponsor. So really looking at force majeure clauses and COVID-19 clauses. So trying to advise sport and the sports industry around the rights that they have in relation to not being able to deliver in these particular circumstances. And also, I guess, encouragingly, looking at new contracts. For some clients, that conversation has not just been around existing contracts, but new contracts, new sponsors, even in these times, sponsors that are looking to the long term, and really adjusting those new contracts to ensure that the benefits can be delivered across a wider period, or benefits can be delivered across digital platforms. The third issue I wanted to touch on is postponing and cancelling competitions or programs and events. So looking at the operational and commercial impact and management of stakeholders and the legal issues associated with that. The fourth key issue has been around, as I said before, business as usual. So I guess I wanted to provide some different examples. Certainly, I don't think there's any single day in sport is usual or normal or standard, but we've still been advising around child safe complaints, which that they need to be dealt with appropriately and in the same manner as they would have even outside of the COVID-19 circumstances. Similarly, looking at policies and disciplinary regulations or commercial agreements, anything that's sort of bubbling along in the background that still needs some attention. And I think it's really important to at least, you may not be able to deal with all of those issues at once, and a lot of them probably can be parked to the side or postponed, but it's really important to have a list, to be quite planned and practical about what you can get to and what you can't get to, and having conversations in a really upfront manner with any stakeholders where you'd like to postpone conversations. The fifth issue is focusing on ongoing projects. We've had quite a bit of discussion and engagement with clients around bringing forward projects that have been on their list that they would have liked to have got to, but in their sort of everyday busy operations, they've never quite managed to get to the top of the list. For some clients, it's been a case of being able to prioritise projects, so staff that they've been able to bring back, relying on the JobKeeper payments, whose usual day might be related to events or competitions, and therefore they're not currently able to perform those particular roles. So really looking at what projects those people can pick up and really directing the human resource within your sport or your organisation towards those ongoing projects, and being able to, I guess, manage that as proactively and constructively as possible. The sixth issue is refunds. This is a pretty complex area. Certainly it's very relevant for councils, for sport organisations, for businesses across the sport sector. Looking at memberships, you know, sometimes people are asking for refunds of memberships because of their financial circumstances. Sometimes they're asking just because they don't believe they've got the same benefits that they would have otherwise got in a normal sport year. Also, in relation to events or functions, that question of whether a refund is required, whether it can be provided, whether it should be provided. I guess one of the challenges with refunds is it's really the answer to whether you are obliged to give a refund is really very dependent on the particular circumstances. So looking at the particular contractual relationship between the two parties, and also the circumstances surrounding the request. Sometimes this hasn't played out enough to be able to provide a view about whether a legal obligation has yet formed. But certainly it's really important to be alive to the question. I think there's nothing wrong with having a really upfront discussion with your stakeholders, so whether that's members or, you know, your people who have booked a function or attending an event, and talking about the options, providing them with options which are different from refunds. So talking about whether you can postpone, talking about whether there are other benefits that they have received or will receive. And I guess encouraging them or asking them to consider staying, you know, holding out, waiting around until you're in a position to be able to really better inform those people around alternative options before a decision is made about refunds. 2 more to go. So number 7 is virtual activity and digital platforms. This has really been key for all of you across engaging with fans, participants, athletes, staff, stakeholders. One of the things I think is important to remember is that your obligations in relation to handling data that you might collect through these new platforms, or new data that you're collecting because you're engaging in a lot more than you had previously, is still governed by the privacy laws. It's still really important that you collect, use and store data in a way that protects personal information and complies with the privacy laws. So really thinking before you start a new activity about how that's relevant, to make sure that you've got some really fundamental arrangements in place. And finally, we've all talked about return to play. So I think that has a lot of different forms for every organisation. But I guess the key is making sure that your business is ready to go, so that the turnaround time between relaxing restrictions and announcements is as short as possible for the organisation. I think part of that is supporting clubs and looking at what you can be doing for your clubs and associations. But certainly part of it is also this word opportunity, which has come up quite a few times today in the discussions around return to play. So there'll be restrictions, there'll be difficulties, there'll be challenges, but also looking at, well, how can we do it differently? What are the opportunities? What can we continue doing that we've been doing across this COVID period? What can we do better than we had before, because we've really had to think about it differently? So as with all of this, there's a lot of layers and elements, but I think that's probably the list of key legal issues, obviously a lot broader than just legal issues in play there across those 4 phases. Certainly, I know that Lisa's got some questions that you've all submitted, so happy to answer some of those questions. But also Lisa has our details, so if you want to have some conversations offline, happy to have a chat separately after the webinar.
Thank you, Amelia. Fantastic. I think you've covered some of the questions in that, but we can dig down afterwards if we need to. So really important, a lot of really important points there, but I think the main thing, the takeout, is to communicate with your stakeholders so that they know where you're at. Obviously, planning is all scenario planning at the moment because we have no date of return. We're not sure what we'll be able to do when we do return. We know that it will be different. So making sure that all the stakeholder groups you normally talk to, you're still talking to, and providing that information, communication, and in some cases for members, providing value in a different way. Maybe it's a training program online with your head coach. Maybe it's a few tips that only the members get and it doesn't go out onto general social platforms. But those things a lot of sports are doing really well to keep that value going, and that kind of links into refunds. Obviously, some of the data that you'll see in our report that Steve, Gatt and Anthony Bowd on my team put together regarding finances is there's a huge risk if everyone does ask for a refund, because obviously it's the money that you are using as a sports industry to pay for lots of things, some of which you've already paid for. So as Amelia said, there's probably a million different ways that this discussion can go forward with regarding refunds. We've been doing some work communicating with the sports industry around sticking with your sport, but getting people that do have the means to stay with their sport, to pay their membership, to engage in different ways and get value in different ways until we're up and running. And hopefully we're up and running pretty soon so that the winter sports can have a season of some sort, whatever that timeline might be. And obviously then there's conversations going on between different sports, winter sports, particularly AFL and football, with cricket and other sports that would normally not share a ground. There would be a distinct season, but we'll have some season creep potentially, depending on when we can return to play. And those sports are talking to each other about how that might look, and engaging with councils about, well, what could we do? If we've got a football field up in the moment, when are we going to be able to get the cricket pitch down? When are the goalposts coming down? What are the timings of that? What do the scenarios look like? Based on the fact that we don't have timings yet, but what are the plans? And that's opening those communication lines and making sure that we're chatting to each other. That's a really important piece of work that will be part of the return to play framework. What does your season creep look like? What facilities can you use? What can't you use? How long is it going to take to get them up to be safe? Have they been looked after in the break? It'll depend on the kind of facilities and who's looking after them, but they're all important questions to discuss as we go along. And we'll be having a checklist that we'll get out to people in coming weeks that can make sure that you cover off on all those things and think about that. And obviously you're all involved in different organisations, so you'll take different things away from that depending on your sport or your facility or your organisation. Now I want to open it up to the panel, and I think we can open up so you can see everyone to answer some of the questions, there we go, that haven't been answered, and I can throw to different people. We have, as I thought, we have had quite a few questions answered just with people's presentations, and hey Steve, we can now see Steve. And obviously, you know, Amelia's offered it, Steve's offered it. If people have specific questions after this, please send them into Vicsport and we will triage them to the right people, whether it be VicHealth or SRV or Steve or Amelia or any of my team, because there will be things that come up or things that you discuss after this with your teams or in a team meeting this week, and you might need some clarification, and we'll certainly endeavour to help you there. One of the things that has come up in a question was about refunds, and we've pretty much covered that, and obviously there's it depends is part of the answer. Another question that has come up is about what we would give some advice to some people on the line that are from a school environment. And obviously schools are grappling with teaching at home, and an important part of that is sport and physical education and activity. And probably, Tom, have you seen some things in your travels that sports are doing that could easily be pulled across to home, so kids could choose some of those activities and do them at home? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, certainly put me on the spot. But I did notice that Tennis Australia have put out a tennis at home resource pack, or called something similar, that goes through their Bounce platform that tennis coaches log onto. And I think they've created a whole series of different games and ways for coaches to still connect with parents and families and link that to school curriculum. So that looks like a really great example. I haven't seen the detail, but one example of trying to support children and families to stay active during this period.
Yep. And online, we've got a list of different things that sports and recreation people are doing. If you've got any more, please send them through, because we'll keep building those lists that can then be used by other sports or other agencies in terms of keeping people active. Ben, a question for you. In the package of funding, obviously the immediate thought and most of the conversations happen around SSAs and RSAs and that the peak body level. But I know you've done some thinking around clubs, associations and leagues, the next level down. Can you give us any insight into is there going to be some funding for that level, or what's the thinking?
Yeah, Lisa, there definitely is. So there's different sort of names that we're working through at the moment to describe that, but there is a proposed pot of money that will be available to support clubs and associations with strategies to return to play, but also to alleviate immediate sort of cash flow issues that they've had. So it will be under a sort of a competitive application process, and part of that government submission certainly includes recognition at that club and association level. The difficulty that we've got, or discussions that we're having, is just how best to verify that, as far as, you know, whether we go back through and obviously link in with support recognition from the state bodies as well, because clearly their knowledge of the members, their membership groups, whether it's a clubs and associations, they've got the best knowledge around the needs for those clubs and associations. So it's been a really robust discussion we've had internally about government about how do you best direct that funding. Is it straight in with an opportunity for clubs and associations, or is it through the SSNA sharing that opportunity down to their members? So I think when you see the package, hopefully once it's approved, there's the element of clubs and associations being able to apply directly for a component of that funding. Lisa, just while I'm sort of answering that question, really struck home with Stephen Gatt's comment just around knowledge of thresholds, or sort of the cash flow forecasting, and that's going to be really important with the assessment criteria that's going to be applied. So I'm just going to sort of look off to the side and just reading through some notes that obviously that assessment criteria is going to be approved by Minister Spence, particularly for the community sport aspect of it, but having a demonstrated financial viability of the organisation through the financial statements, the cash flow statements, etc., is going to be critical in the application process for this. You know, the evidence that people, or demonstrated evidence that they've used their existing cash reserves for, you know, as much as possible to consider the need for a reasonable level of working capital, and also that, you know, you've made those efforts, as I said, to link into state and federal funding packages. So one of the things that will be linked here, and you'll see this obviously as soon as possible when we can release out further details, I mentioned the importance around each sport and activity considering a return to play strategy, and I know that Amelia's spoken about it as well today. So just reading off here, part of the funding, it's sort of got, you know, every funded organisation will need to prepare a return to play plan that commits to, and there's a couple of points here which I know people are working on, the retention of member connections, and we've spoken a lot about that today, during the period of the purpose of continued physical activity, the development of a clear and consistent guideline for participants, members and volunteers, etc., around training and competition, what you're doing in that membership sponsorship space to re-engage people in those plans, the training and development for business continuity and financial resilience, and also just some acceptance that there may be some further reviews of governance and financial management that organisations such as Vicsport can support, peak bodies in and other organisations, but just some sort of acceptance that you might participate in those type of reviews so that going forward we can strengthen the industry. So that's a really important sort of qualification. There will be some assessment criteria that the Minister will approve.
Yeah, so kind of in the usual way, Ben, that, you know, it's money to support, it's money to survive, but it's not money for nothing. There needs to be some evidence around why you need it. moving forward.
Correct, and there needs to be, there's obviously a little bit of risk for government in supplying and providing support. We need to make sure those other considerations are there as far as what else you've tapped into, and also that obviously you've got a plan for how that money is going to be used, because it is ultimately taxpayers' dollars. Lisa, the other one I was going to quickly touch on, and I know it was one of the questions that Tom might be able to further inform as well. We've had a lot of queries just around consideration, and maybe Chris Lacey particularly in this space too. Minister Spence has got a significant interest in what impacts COVID has had on some of the vulnerable cohorts and targeted groups, particularly with the shutdown. So I just wanted to sort of mention that that Bridie O'Donnell, who's the Director of the Office of Women in Sport and Recreation, is leading a project at the moment within Sport and Rec, and it will also involve reaching out for further input to actually grab as much data as we can around the impact on those vulnerable groups, because there's not, sometimes in some situations, the information and data is quite limited. So we're talking about, obviously, it could be the gendered impacts of the pandemic on women and girls. We've also obviously people with disability, Aboriginal Victorians, the cold groups, LGBTIQ, etc., and disengaged youth. And obviously, given that Minister Spence is also Minister for Multicultural and Youth, there's that interface as well of her interest in knowing what the effects has been on COVID to these vulnerable cohorts. So I just wanted to sort of at least mention that work is taking place. It's most likely that any outcomes directly from that might be targeted towards those vulnerable cohorts would be in that second tranche of sport rebound funding, and that's something that we would have conversations absolutely back with Vicsport and VicHealth and other organisations.
Thank you, Ben. That covers off on a few questions. Chris, do you want to add anything to that before I throw to Steve?
I mean, that's really interesting to hear, Ben, and we'd obviously be really happy to take part in that. But no, I don't. Beyond that, I think there's no great words of wisdom around that just at the moment. I think we're very aware, as Ben mentioned, that some of these groups that are traditionally underrepresented in sport and recreation, all the data shows us that they will be more affected by the shutdown as well, and so we'll be directing a lot of our focus to trying to make sure that, as Bridie said on Offsiders a couple of weeks ago, that we're doing whatever we can to make sport as inclusive as we possibly can. So, happy to be part of that discussion and that work.
Steve, you picked up on a question just following up on some of the JobKeeper information.
Yeah, so there's a question about whether regional football or netball clubs with a turnover that pay players according to a salary cap would be eligible for JobKeeper. So without answering it definitely, because there are other criteria, but one of the critical things is that if you're paying people through as an employee and therefore withholding their pay as you go and paying that through your normal BAS process, then it's likely that they'd be eligible. If you're paying them as through statement by supplier through the hobby criteria, then you wouldn't be eligible for JobKeeper. So that's probably one of the key differences that will depend on how you make those payments to those players.
Fantastic. Chris, there was a question about sponsorship, and obviously some sponsors are going to be hit hard, and for all of us, it's going to be tricky to get them back. And there was a comment about the fact that it might be easier to get the big sponsors that are doing quite well at the moment through takeaway and various other things back, but others, that we want involved with sport in terms of healthy sponsors might be a bit trickier. Are you able to comment on any of the work that we've been chatting about in terms of healthy sponsorships, or is it a bit early for that?
Yeah, that's still in development. Certainly, we're very aware about unhealthy sponsors at the moment, and we're already seeing a little bit that, and probably preparing for the fact that some of those unhealthy sponsors may use this as an opportunity to come into the space. And so we're obviously concerned about that. We'd much rather unhealthy sponsors not be a part of sport and recreation. I think that's pretty clear from our point of view. So we're doing some more work in that space, and we are looking at the moment through potentially our active club grant round, doing some more work, and potentially also doing some work with leagues and associations in that space, and certainly local government as well. So yeah, keep an eye open for that. There'll be more that comes out, and certainly we'd be interested in hearing about ideas in that space that people may have. Obviously, we know that sponsorships are so important for clubs on the ground and for leagues and associations too, and that's going to create a lot of pressures. So we're not, going closed-eyed on that. That's the reality. But yeah, we are also trying to prepare for the fact that unhealthy sponsors may want to enter the space and doing what we can to make sure that we're providing whatever opportunities we can for sports to make the best decisions they can in that space, I suppose. So keep your eye open for that. We'll be doing some work with Vicsport around that coming up, and potentially SRV as well.
Thanks, Chris. Amelia, just one off the top of my head, in the return to play type environment, we're obviously focusing on returning to get onto the park or into the gym or onto the field. But in terms of returning people into the office, is there any things that come across your desk about just things that as CEOs, MDs and managers of businesses and sports that might have staff that need to be concerned about and think about in that return to the office rather than return to play?
Yes, that's a short answer. There's not an exhaustive list, but I think one obvious one is around whether they're trying to return their staff in a role that is less hours than their full-time role. So certainly that's been quite common for businesses in the sport and leisure industry, is to look at bringing staff back to perhaps part-time roles in the short term, with a mind to, when this is over, whatever that means, to be able to return back to the full-time role. So it is absolutely important to handle that in the right way. I'm trying to avoid being a lawyer and say you probably need to talk to us, but you probably need to talk to someone, because as a first principles observation, for someone to move from full-time work to part-time work, you need to have their agreement. Now, from all of the discussions I've been having with businesses in the sport and leisure industry, employees have been very engaged in that conversation, open-minded about short-term changes. So if you have agreement with that employee, then you can absolutely temporarily change their employment arrangement. It's no coincidence that has aligned with JobKeeper payments, and obviously that was in some ways intended by the government. There is a mechanism by which employers can issue a direction where an employee is returning to work or reducing their hours, and they're going to be receiving JobKeeper payment. I wouldn't like to say you can just give a direction and it's that simple, do what you like. I think you do need to carefully consider the way you go about it. And in my view, even if you have a power or legal right to direct someone to reduce their hours, it's going to be better if it's a genuine conversation and there's genuine agreement about doing that. Now, as I said, I've seen a lot of those conversations go really constructively, but I have also seen a couple of clients who have had staff who said, look, we had a conversation. I didn't actually, like your email to me says you agreed, in that first conversation. I didn't agree. I listened, and I'm not saying I'm not going to agree, but I haven't agreed yet. And so I don't like the fact that the letter you just handed over to me at that first meeting says you have agreed by accepting this letter. So I think it's important to plan a phased approach. You might need to plan to have more than one conversation with individual staff members. It's not just a group meeting where you announce it to everyone. And I think that, as with anything, the better you communicate, and the more opportunity you provide for that to be two-way communication, the more likely that you'll move to a position that both the employer and the employee can live with. I'm not sure that anyone necessarily going to be high-fiving you for reducing their hours, but they can live with it because they understand the long-term process. But it is an area where if you get it wrong, hypothetically, the risk is that the employee could claim that you actually should have been paying them as a full-time employee for the whole period, and that the reduced hours wasn't undertaken appropriately. So it's probably, lawyers like to tell you to see lawyers, so feel free to come to us, but feel free to go to someone else. But it's probably worth spending a small amount of money to get some guidance to save more money down the track. But at the end of the day, the more you communicate that, the better that outcome will be.
Yeah, thank you for that. And obviously everyone's circumstances are different. And the other thing that we need to be mindful of is we're talking about rules of return to play on the field and how many people we might be able to have and how we might be able to construct our sport in the training environment, maybe not a playing environment to start with, who knows, depending on those Department of Health rules that come out as we relax some restrictions. Well, we have the same in the office where your office space might not be conducive to having everyone come back at once. So those are the things that we need to think about as managers that are out there kind of thinking about how they're going to return to work in the work context as well. Ben, I want to throw to you just to get into the last couple of questions, last few minutes. The questions come up about, we've talked about clubs and associations and in the community sport context, but there are some clubs that are privately owned and run as businesses. Are those type of people, assuming they're affiliated with the state body, are those kind of people going to be able to tap into some of the funding requirements? Will they be able to? Have you got any insight into that?
Yeah, Lisa, again, that is a discussion that was held internally as well, and I think there are some challenges with that. So recognising, for example, there might be the private gymnastics clubs, etc. One of the issues I think is going to come down to whether they're incorporated or not. So we had a bit of a discussion around that. So that is live at the moment, and I'll probably just take that question on notice as far as to put back that the importance of stressing that in the guidelines or qualifying who's exactly eligible and who's not. But it is a point of discussion at the moment. Obviously, also recognising whether that comes under the professional sort of sport downflow as well, even though because they are sort of could still be a not-for-profit, but in that more elite or sub-elite positioning of services, etc. So I'll take that as a question on notice to feed back into the team that are working on the guidelines. Okay, thank you for that. So just a quick one. I saw a lot of questions come through about the different activities at home, and be really not appropriate for me not to mention if I know Chris mentioned the pivoting of This Girl Can with VicHealth, and I know the government's done the same with Active April, because as people are on this, still sort of 280 participants on this webinar, that's has been over the last couple of years a concentrated sort of campaign, clearly in the month of April, but that program has pivoted as well, and it's got activities that you mentioned, sort of school groups and others that might be able to do, families and club members, etc. There's a whole lot of advice on nutrition, healthy eating, and different challenges that people can do on there to earn sort of virtual trophies. And I think you'll see very, very shortly, and it's encourage people to go to that website, which is activeapril.vic.gov.au. Definitely sort of workout videos, and the campaign's going to be running extended past April, so it's going to be turned into pretty much a full year focus on that because of the reliance and then the need out there. I know the marketplace has filled that already with many sports and individuals tapping in with activities you can do at home to healthy, but there's also some great advice and suggestions on the Active April website about how people can stay connected and stay active and maintain that physical and, importantly, as Chris mentioned, their mental well-being as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a few questions coming in about the return to play. So there'll be, as I said, a series of checklists around return to play, but specific return to play protocols related to health and sticking with the relaxed restrictions. Now, obviously, there's nothing that we've got as yet. We're working on those, and government will be working on the ones related to the health rules. So it'll depend on what's announced as relaxation, which in Victoria will be after May 11. So there won't be anything changing until then, as far as I understand. And so as soon as we've got something to send to you, we will be sending that out, and how that's managed and how sports can kind of adhere to that, and whether it needs to be checked off or not checked off, or whether you just grab the rules and run with them as you see best is all up in the air at the moment. So there are some of the discussions we're having about how we help sport manage that, because we understand from when the restrictions were put in place, there was a lot of pressure put on various parts of the sports industry, from CEOs right down to clubland and councils, around what you were and weren't allowed to do. So there's some work going into that to help with that on the way up, as we went on the way down. So we'll keep you posted. Make sure that you keep in touch with our website and the Sport and Recreation website. We link back to Sport and Rec from ours. Any intel that we get from Peter Betson or Health Department, we put on that website. Any ideas we get from you, we put on their website to keep you in touch with what's going on. Future webinars are on that website, so you can dial into future webinars where we'll look at different elements of sport, including a focus on LGA and clubs. So please connect in as best you can. If you need advice and you want to touch base with anyone on the screen, please you can come through us at Vicsport, and we can triage those questions through to the right people. And any other questions that we have that come through either now or that you email to us afterwards, we'll attempt to send you to the right person or answer them as we go back to the group, asking you to kind of fill in a survey about how you found today's webinar. I think we got through fairly unscathed in this technological world. So thank you. I want to thank the panellists for the time they've put into today, because in this busy environment, an hour and a half is a long time. I want to thank all our people in the background from different areas of sport and recreation and the industry, to just thank you for dialing in. Thank you for your work and your support and your positive outlook on what we're going through. We are working in the background to give you as much information and resources as we can to help you to make the restart and return to play as easy as possible. But if you've got any questions or ideas or things that you don't understand or know where to turn, please come to us, because a lot of your questions help us kind of refine the work that we're doing and make sure that we've got the right answers in frameworks and checklists and things like that. So thank you to our panel. Have a good day. Get out into the sun before it turns to 13 degrees and hailing for the rest of the week. And stay healthy, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all in person as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.